G'day, Stu from UAVfutures here, and today, well, I'm going to be showing you guys how to build one of these beasts, one of these fantastically color coordinated bad boys right here. Now this is the Dubai 210 Racer, and this is going to be the beginner's guide to building an FPV quadcopter, because we're going to be using a kit which comes with our motors, our ESCs, and our frames, and all you've got to all you've got to do is source your FPV gear and also the right receiver that's going to talk to your radio. So if you've been thinking about building a quadcopter for a while, or you're not 100% sure on what components to get, it's a little bit daunting, that's what this video is for, because we've chosen a kit and we're going to be putting it together and then pretty much getting some awesome flights out of it. Anyway, without further ado, let's stick it on the bench. I'll show you what you need and let's get building. Alright, so here's everything we need to build our Dubai Racer. So everything that comes with the kit, we've got our frame just here, some fantastic motors and ESCs, and also our props. We've got a really good SP F3 flight controller and a good PDB, and then you need to source these parts. You need to source your FPV gear and your receiver yourself. So you need a VTX and a camera, as well as an antenna and a pigtail if you want to use one of those, and also a receiver that's going to talk to your radio. Anyway, we'll talk about each of these bits a bit more in detail when we get to them, but let's jump right in and start prepping our PDB and putting it into our frame. You're also going to need some of these nylon sort of standoffs as well, and maybe some little bits of heat shrink and bits of wire, and you're going to use some solder and little pieces like that, so they'll be inside the build as well. Alrighty, so the first thing what we need to do, we need to actually put our PDB and mount it inside our frame, and the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to use these little nylon standoffs just here by putting them through the sort of these nice 4 little holes that are made perfectly right here, and our PDB is going to sit just on top of that, and it will also have enough room for our receiver to slide underneath. So we'll put our PDB on the top like this, and then what's going to happen, our receiver will be able to slide underneath nice and snug like that, so we should have a super clean stack. Anyway, now that's on there, we'll get that receiver out of the way. We're going to go ahead and we're going to solder up a lot of these pads. We're going to pre-tin them. Alright, so it's time to pre-tin our board just here, and this is going to make it a lot easier when we're soldering in our ESCs in a little bit, as well as our VTX wires and things like that. So we just want to get in nice and hot soldering iron in and out very quickly, and we'll attach our battery leads as well. So I'm going to go around and solder all these, and then we'll cut to what she looks like. A good little tip too, you've got your 5 volts and 12 volts just here. Now they do come pre-tinned, but it might be worth just hitting it up with a little bit of solder in case it's oxidized since the last time that it was done. Alrighty, so that's looking good. Let's move on to the next step. Alright, now the next step is all about hooking up our ESCs and our motors and making sure they're all ready, because we have to do this 4 times. So the motors I'm using, now these are fantastic motors. These are the red bottom Emax motors, the 2205, 2300 kV, and these are a fantastic motor, especially for a 5-inch prop, so you're going to love these motors, an absolute powertrain. And the ESCs we're using, they're going to be the OC Day ESCs, and they can handle a 2 to 4S LiPo and as well as Rock BL Heli. So the first thing we need to do is actually strip off all this clear heat shrink. So I'm going to strip this clear heat shrink off right now. There we go. Alrighty, so you're going to need to do that to all 4 of your ESCs. Alright, so I've done that to all 4 of my ESCs, and now we need to desolder these wires just here, because that's where we're going to be connecting our motors up. So what we're going to do, very, very simple process. We're just going to be, with a nice clean soldering iron, little fresh solder on the tip, and just heating it up and taking these off. Alrighty, and then also what I recommend people do is, just to make the process a little bit easier, just dab a little bit of fresh solder on there. Alright, so you need to do that to all 4 of your ESCs, and if you're wondering what this is blue tack. It's like from an office stationery shop, so it's used for holding up posters, but really, really good little tip at using it to sort of secure your ESCs. Alright, so I've done that to all 4 of my ESCs, and now it's time to connect our motors up. And what we need to do, we need to direct solder these straight across here to our ESCs. And something I get asked quite a bit, I get a few messages and they say, and it says basically, Stu, do I have to cut my motor wires so short? And the answer is no, you can actually leave them as long as you feel comfortable. So what I'm going to do, I do recommend cutting off this end part just here though, because I'd want to pre-tin my own wires. But what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to leave these motor wires a little bit longer just to show you that it doesn't have any real negative impacts except for adding a little bit of weight. So usually I would be cutting my motor wires much shorter, but in this case I'm going to leave them quite long. Alright, so what you need to do, you need to cut your wires, and then you're going to strip off just a little bit of rubber on the outside, and then we're going to pre-tin them. Again, I'm going to use my blue tack. Here's 1, 2, and 3. Alright, so you need to do that to all 4 of your motors as well. Alrighty, so we've got our 4 motors and we've got our 4 ESCs, and now it's time to, there's 3, there's the 4th one, and now it's time to hook them all up. And what we need to do, depending on how we hook them up, is going to determine which direction they actually spin. And these motors, some of them are counterclockwise and some of them are actually clockwise. There's the clockwise ones and there's the counterclockwise ones. So these clockwise ones are going to go on motors 1 and 4, and these counterclockwise ones are spinning on motors 2 and 3. And the way you can change the direction of the motor is how you solder it up. So if you solder them up straight across, they're going to spin one way. And if you, so the first wire to the first pad, second wire to the second pad, and third wire to the third pad, that's going to make them spin one way. And if you want to change the direction, all you have to do is simply cross over 2 of those wires, and that's going to change the direction. Now that's the hard way, or you can do it the easy way, and that's to plug it into the computer when you're finished your build, and you can change it through the BL Heli software, and I'll leave a link for that in the description as well. So I'm just going to solder them all. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to solder them all straight across, and I'm just going to change it in the software. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that and you want to reverse the direction of a motor, all you have to do is swap 2 of these wires over. Alrighty, so let's get ahead and solder these together. So this is really simple, especially because we've pre-tinned both our wires as well as these little ESC pads. Just get in and out. So there's 1 wire, do the second one, 2, and here's the third one. It's moving around a little bit. Stay still. And the third one. Alright, so that's our motors done. That's one of them. What we need to do, we need to do that to all 4 of them. So let's, I'm going to do that, and then we're going to cut back to what it looks like with all those done. Alright, so now we've soldered up all our motors and they've got all our ESCs attached. We're actually going to screw them down to our frame. So we're going to put our, there we go, there's the counterclockwise, clockwise and clockwise. We're going to actually screw our motors down. So the clockwise motors, and you can tell that because they've got these little arrows just here on the motor itself, which tell you which way it's going to go. So we're going to screw those down using the supplied hardware that came with our motors, and then I'll get back to it. So that's our next step. So I'm going to screw those down. And when you're doing it, just make sure that the screws aren't touching the inside wire coils. You don't want that happening. Alright, so here's all my motors screwed in, and this is what I was talking about before, where it's okay to leave the leads a little bit longer if you're not too confident with cutting them too short. So all you're going to have to do is double them back. Now I don't usually build like this, but that's how I'm going to do it in this case, just to show you that it's totally fine. All you're going to have is that little bit of excess weight that you could probably remove. Anyway, what our next step is, before we go any further, we actually need to put a piece of heat shrink over these so it doesn't short out on the carbon, because carbon fiber is conductive. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut myself 4 pieces of heat shrink that will fit over the ESCs. Now this heat shrink's probably a little bit big, but it's still the one that I'm going to be using. Alright, like that. And then all we have to do is slide it over the top of our ESC, over the ESC wires, just like this, and that's going to shrink down onto our ESC a little bit. I'm actually going to slide it all the way to the bottom until we're ready to plug in the power. Alright, so now I've got all the heat shrink on here. What we need to do, we need to actually connect this up to our battery, or at least make a lead so that can happen. So what we're going to do is hook up our XT60 connector. Now the XT60 is going to come probably just looking like this with the two prongs out the back. All I've simply done is put this wire in just here and shrunk it down. So I've soldered in my own two wires, and just make sure that positive is on the flat side and ground is sort of on the curved one right here. And I've got plenty of other videos, build guides, where I have shown you how to make up these leads, so save us all a bit of time, so you can watch that right here if you're stuck, or if you know, just go ahead and make up one of these. And we're going to hook this up to our battery, so hook this up to our PDB. So you've got a little ground tab here and a positive tab just here. We're going to solder those in. There we go. Alright, so my battery lead is in. Now what we probably need to do, and this bit is probably a little bit complicated, just let me put down my soldering iron. Essentially, we need to find where our ESCs are going to end up. So let's say I double mine back like that. And we need to cut these wires accordingly and solder them up. So for me, I know that, let's say, to get to this positive pad, that wire needs to be about that long. The ground about there, and that ground as well. So you need to cut each one of these wires and pre-tin the end. The only one you want to leave a little bit longer is this white wire here, because that's actually going to be connected to our flight controller. So at the moment, what I'm going to do, and I'll do this first one here with you guys, and then we'll cut to the end result. So let's see, I want that positive wire is going to go to that positive pad. And that's a good thing about having a little bit of slack here in the thing is too, if you need to move it around, you're still going to have that extra room. The ground wire. Alright, I'm going to cut these way up here, because I know I won't need that much. Untwist them. Alright, and my ground wire about that much. Alright, so now I'm going to, don't worry about this white wire just yet, we'll deal with that in a minute. So now I'm going to strip the ends. Just like that. And we'll pre-tin the ends of them. Ooh. Alrighty, and now we'll connect these up to our PDB. Get rid of this blue tack. You might have to double up some of the wires, like I'm putting both of the grounds to this same pad just here. There we go. Alrighty, so that is one of my ESCs wired up. Let's do this to all four of them and we'll cut back to what it looks like. Alrighty, so now that's all soldered up. The only loose wires we should have just here are these white ones, and we'll deal with those in a minute. But what we do need to do, we need to hook up a way to power our VTX as well as powering our flight controller. Now what I'm going to do, I've got my VTX right here. It's actually a little Omway, a fantastic little 200 milliwatt Omway VTX. These things are great because they provide a nice clean 5 volts out that will power our FPV camera. But in order to power to this thing, we need to hook it up to our PDB, and I'm going to use this little pad right here, the 12 volt pad. So no matter what size voltage we put in, we're always going to run a nice 12 volts to our PDB. So I'm going to solder that up right now. There we go. So now we've got a way of powering our FPV system. And now the only other thing we need to solder to this PDB is a way to power our flight controller. Now I'm going to use this 5 volt pad right here, and some of the wire we cut off the ESC before will be perfect. So I'm going to strip these ends right here and pre-tin those and solder those in, just like we have been all the way through this video. Alright, and now we'll solder these in, and I'm going to make sure that black is the ground. So I'm going to solder the ground in. So there's the ground, and here's our positive. Alrighty, so here's another good little tip. Once you've done this, all these little connections just here, like this, the 5-volt connections or your VTX connections, or even these little ground wires, they can be a little bit fragile with all the vibrations that happen up and down in a quadcopter. So what I really recommend people do is hit these with a little bit of hot glue. Alrighty, so if you want to do that, you can. Let's move on with the build. Alrighty, so now it's time to look at our flight controller. Now this is the Seriously Pro F3 flight controller. This thing is absolutely awesome. But what we do need to do, these ports, this is underneath it actually, ports 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're going to be our motor ports where we're going to attach our little white wires that we left, and we also need to attach a ground and a positive so it can have some power. So I'm just going to pre-tin these in here. So there's number 1 pre-tinned. Getting a bit shaky. Two. Three. And here's number 4. Alrighty, so there's our 4 little signal pads, so 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and then we're just going to do a ground and a voltage as well. So just over here, I'm going to do the voltage on channel 8, and just to give it a little bit of separation, and then I'm going to do the ground on number 6, just so it's got a bit of a separation so we can really even reduce the risk of shorts even further. Rightio, and now it's time to hook it up to our quad. Alrighty, so now it's time to actually solder it in, and I recommend people just sit it on the top just like this to make it a little bit easier, then we can flip it over. But what people need to recognize here is this part is really important, that we make sure that this is motor 1, so this wire coming off ESC number 1 goes to port number 1, motors 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you need to hook them up to the corresponding little ports in here. I'm going to zoom in so you can see what we're doing, but I think you need to make sure that you have the correct motor wire just here soldered to the correct port on the board. Alrighty, so this one's motor 1, so I'm just going to solder that in. 1. This is number 2, so I'm going to solder number 2 in. Number 3. And this one's number 4. Alrighty, so there are our signal wires done. Now we just need to hook up our voltage, and what we have here is, that's these 2 ones over here. So remember, we left the black as the ground, but always double check. So I'm going to solder in the ground. You might need to just shuffle this around a little bit. I might just store it upside down for the minute. Alrighty, so black is the ground, white is positive, so I'm going to solder this in. There's that one, and now soldering in the ground. Alrighty, so that's our flight controller all soldered up. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take it and flip it upside down and put some of the wires underneath just here. Alrighty, so now it's time to actually just put it down and screw it on the frame, but what you need to take note of is this little arrow just here and where the USB port is. So this is actually going to be rotated 90 degrees in the Clean Flight software, but by doing this we're going to have easy access to the USB port on the side. So I'm going to just put that down like that. It doesn't matter which direction you want to mount it, you can have it mounted any way you like in any orientation. You could even flip it upside down as long as you tell the software that you've done that. So there, I've put that on there so I can access the USB to the side. So then I won't have to come in sort of from this angle. It's going to be much easier. So I'm just going to screw that down, and then we're going to be able to get on with the build, and we're coming pretty close to the end actually. Alright, so now let's talk about putting our receiver in. Now I'm using an old D4R2 that I've just taken the plastic off, and that's because it's going to fit very, very easily with this build, but feel free to use an XSR or one of the newer receivers out there. I'm going to be using this one because of the pins on the outside make it super easy for anybody to connect up to this flight controller. All you need to do now, this flight controller is going to come with a few sets of pins and a whole bunch of cables and stuff like that. You want to find the one where you have three of the wires going directly into one of these, because that's it. All you need to do is slide that over the end of your receiver. So that simply goes into this port just here. Make sure you get it the right way around. Just simply goes in just like that. And then this simply connects just here. Sorry about my dog barking in the background. Just like that. And that's it. That is how easy it is to hook up your receiver. You don't need to do any soldering or anything like that. So that's why I've chose to use my D4R2. What you can do if you like is take these pins out, so you don't actually need these little wires. So you can either cut them off or slide a little X-Acto knife in and under the pins and peel them out. Totally up to you. Alrighty, so that's what it looks like if you take the pins out. Super easy. You can either just cut them, but yeah, that's how easy it is to install your receiver. And if you are going to use a D4R2, just making sure you put over this little jumper here, because that's going to enable PPM mode, which means we can send all our signals that we need to just on one way here, rather than connecting up all our wires. Anyway, let's move on with the rest of the build, and that's putting in our FPV gear. Alright, so for my VTX, I'm going to be using this trusty Onway 200 milliwatt VTX, and we've already soldered in our little 12 volt sort of little power supply from before, so that's going to go in here. But you will need to do a little bit of adaptations depending on what sort of camera you have, and you can tell I've used this one quite a few times in a few builds. But pretty much you're going to have some cables just here, some wires running off, and you need to connect them up to your camera. I'm using a HS1177, a really high quality camera and pretty much a gold standard of what people have been using, at least for the last 6 months or so. A really, really popular camera, and it fits very nicely in this frame. But all you need to do is strip the wires a little bit, and you want to connect the red wire up to the red wire from the camera, yellow up to yellow, and the ground up to ground. So I'm going to do that now and then show you what that looks like. Right, yeah, so here it is, and all I've done is connect the yellow wire up to the yellow wire of the camera, and red to red, black to black, just to make sure that they can talk nicely. And yeah, there's a little bit of white in here, that's leftovers from some previous builds. But now it's time to install it into a FPV quadcopter. Super simple. All you need to do is plug it in to the little 12 volt power supply that we soldered in earlier. There we go, and now we'd have FPV. Alrighty, now this is probably one of my favorite times of a build, and that's when you need to put everything together. And we're also going to put in our little pigtail, so I'm going to screw that on the back just here, and that's going to save our VTX in a bad crash. But pretty much what we need to do, we need to put this inside, and we're going to build the rest of our frame and then see how we go about putting it in here. I'm not going to go through that process with you. I'm going to just cut to what it looks like, and then I'll explain my choices of why I put it together that way. So we'll have a look at what it looks like in 3, 2, 1. Alrighty, so here it is, and here's what the build looks like when it's all finished. And I gotta say, I love the color scheme that I'm rocking just here. So this yellow and black, I think it looks absolutely fantastic. Now I guess we'll start at the back and work our way towards the front, just so I can explain my choices and how I did things. Of course, we've got our pigtail in just here, so that's secured nice and tightly with this little zip tie, and that's going to be hanging off our VTX. Then you've got this little part just here, and this was great because I could run my battery lead actually at the top of the frame, and that means it's not going to get caught in the propellers, and that's what this nice big cutout is here for as well. So I thought that was a great addition. Moving along here, we've obviously got our battery strap, and I'm running my battery on the top. Some people run them on the bottom, but I think in order to do that you'd need a large sort of Velcro strap on this frame that goes around the whole thing. Of course, I've got my little VTX in here midway in the frame, and that is just being zip tied in. And you might notice these two little parts. Usually people put their antennas, these are the receivers, the receiver antennas. Usually they're at the back of the frame. But all I've done is route the antennas through the middle of the frame and up the middle just here using some little zip ties, and I think they're working great. There's going to be great angles for diversity, and they're well away from the VTX antennas, which sometimes can cause a little bit of interference as well. This is probably where I think this build looks really nice. So in the middle here, this is how I've built my stack. So I've got my VTX, my flight controller, stacked on top of my PDB with my receiver just here underneath, and I still need to actually zip tie that down actually. I'm glad I did this. So all that is really neatly stacked in the middle just here, so it makes for a really clean sort of compact quad. And you want to keep all that weight in the middle as well. You really want that center of gravity to be in the middle of your quad. Of course, you can see I've zip tied down my ESCs and I've shrunk all the heat shrink, and you can see that this wire that it came with, that little bit of extra wire we were talking about before, and is it okay to leave it? It's totally fine. It's not going to do anything. It might add a little bit of extra weight, but if you're worried about cutting your wires too short, don't worry. As long as you keep them down and out of the way of the props, having a little bit of extra wire is totally fine. So there it is, there's my beginner's guide to building a quadcopter, the 210 Dubai Racer, and I gotta say, everything that comes in this kit is some serious performance, so I know you guys are gonna love it out there. If you've got any questions or comments, just please leave them down below. If you're stuck on anything, put that down below as well, and I'll do my best to get back to you and answer all those questions. I'm gonna leave you with some flight footage, but subscribe for more FPV related content, and as always, happy flying! So this is its very first Maiden ever, straight out of the box. I haven't tuned it, so this is pretty much what it's coming like with stock PIDs on Betaflight, and I gotta say, it's not too shabby. I really think it flies quite well, and it was amazingly quiet, so I don't know if that's due to the props or what's going on, but it was super quiet. Now I'm going to stop rambling on and just let you watch the video, but there is one point in here I think I was a bit scared too, because I didn't want to go in the water and it was really windy, and I still didn't trust the quad quite too much anyway. But I did want to get this footage in, but I do a roll at some point coming up, and I think the flight control handled it fantastic. There was no bounce back or anything like that, so when I do the roll, just take note of just how well it looks locked in during that roll. Anyway, happy flying! That's minus FPV gear. That's $180. 80 US.
Those motors too.
Yeah. Motors ES, full flight controller and frame.